Adam Schiff walked onto Bill Maher's stage this year to lecture the country about presidential overreach, and walked off having accidentally trashed his own party's president in front of a national audience. This wasn't a gaffe. It was a live demonstration of exactly the kind of selective, convenient outrage that's defined Schiff's entire career. And Maher, to his credit, didn't let him get away with it. Before we get into it, if you're new here, hit like and subscribe now. We break down moments like this every week, and you don't want to miss the next one. Here's the setup. Schiff came on to make the case that Trump's military operation against Iran was a dangerous overreach of executive power, and that Congress needed to reclaim authority it had supposedly been ceding to an out-of-control presidency. It's the kind of speech Schiff has given 100 times. Grave, constitutional, warning about the founder's intentions, invoking Alexander Hamilton's fear that presidents left unchecked would grow, in his words, too fond of making war. Sounds serious, sounds principled. There's just one problem. Schiff has never once applied this standard to a Democrat, and Maher proved it to his face in about 15 seconds. Maher read him a line of legal reasoning without saying who it belonged to, a justification claiming the president had the constitutional authority to direct military force because he could reasonably determine it was in the national interest. Then he asked Schiff directly, "Is that too vague for you?" Schiff, sensing an easy layup against Trump, said totally vague. And that's when Maher dropped the hammer. That wasn't Trump's justification for Iran. It was Barack Obama's Justice Department in 2011 justifying the strikes on Libya, a war Obama launched without so much as asking Congress for permission first. Watch Schiff's face in that moment, and you're watching the entire modern Democratic Party's approach to executive power in real time. Which is to say, no consistent principle at all, just whatever framing is convenient for whoever happens to be in office. The second Schiff realized he'd just called his own party's legal justification totally vague. He didn't own it. He didn't say, maybe Obama overstepped too. He immediately pivoted to Syria, insisting Obama actually respected Congress because he backed off a strike on Assad once he realized he might not have the votes. As if restraint you only show when you're afraid of losing a vote is the same thing as constitutional principle. It isn't. It's just better math. It's worth sitting with how thin that Syria pivot actually is once you look at it closely, because it's doing all the work in Schiff's attempted save, and it doesn't hold up. Obama didn't decline to strike Syria because he suddenly rediscovered a deep respect for Article 1. He declined because his own party's leadership told him privately the votes weren't there, and because striking without them would have been a political disaster heading into a difficult stretch for his administration. That's not principle. That's a president doing basic vote counting before deciding whether an unpopular military action was worth the fight. Meanwhile, the Libya operation, which didn't have the same political headwinds, went forward under exactly the vague national interest legal standard Schiff just finished calling too weak to justify military action without ever going to Congress for a vote at all. So the actual distinction between Libya and Syria wasn't constitutional principle, it was political convenience, dressed up after the fact as high-minded restraint. That's the same move being made on Maher's stage, in real time, about an entirely different conflict 15 years later. This is the tell that runs through basically every high-profile, principled objection you hear from this wing of the Democratic Party once you actually check the receipts. The concern about unchecked presidential war powers wasn't there in 2011 when a Democrat used almost the identical legal theory to bomb Libya without a vote. It wasn't there when the same administration kept operations running well past the deadlines set by the War Powers Resolution, a law Congress passed specifically to stop presidents from doing exactly that. It shows up exactly when a Republican is in the White House every single time, like clockwork, dressed up in the same borrowed constitutional language as if it's some timeless principle instead of a partisan reflex that gets switched on and off depending on whose name is on the podium. And here's the part that should really embarrass Schiff and everyone nodding along with him. While he was on television lecturing the country about Congress needing to step up and reclaim its authority, the actual House of Representatives, controlled in part by members of his own party, had just voted down a resolution that would have done exactly that. 219 to 212. A bipartisan bill aimed at cutting off the operation Schiff claims is such a dangerous overreach failed, and it failed with help from Democrats. So the sitting senator went on national television demanding Congress do something his own colleagues had just refused to do, days earlier when they actually had the chance. That's not principled resistance. That's theater for a cable audience that doesn't fact-check the calendar. It's worth being honest about the legitimate version of this argument too, because there is one, and it's not actually the partisan one Schiff was making. Presidential war powers really have crept beyond what the Constitution originally intended, and that's a real pattern. But it's a bipartisan one that goes back decades, not a Trump-specific one. Reagan used it in Lebanon and Grenada. Clinton ran an entire bombing campaign in Kosovo well past the legal deadline Congress set. Obama did it in Libya. Now Trump's doing a version of it in Iran. Every single time, Congress has had the actual tools to stop it, cutting off funding, forcing a real vote, using the power the Constitution explicitly gives it. And every single time, whichever party doesn't hold the presidency suddenly discovers deep concern about executive overreach, while the party that does hold it discovers deep respect for the commander-in-chief's judgment. Both parties have played both roles. That's the actual scandal here, and it's a much bigger one than anything specific to Trump or specific to Iran. Look at the actual law Schiff was pretending to defend, because even that falls apart under scrutiny. The War Powers Resolution was passed back in 1973 specifically to force presidents to notify Congress and pull back military action within 60 to 90 days without new authorization. It's been on the books for over 50 years. In that entire time, how many times has Congress actually used it to force a president of either party to stand down mid-operation? Essentially, never. Not under Reagan, not under Clinton, not under Obama. The law exists on paper as some grand check on presidential power that congressional Democrats love to invoke the second a Republican's in office and then quietly ignore the rest of the time because actually using it costs political capital nobody in either party has ever been willing to spend once the missiles are already in the air. So when Schiff stands on Bill Maher's stage acting like this is some unprecedented five-alarm constitutional emergency unique to Trump, what he's really doing is performing concern about a law his own side has never once been willing to enforce against its own president. This is also worth putting next to the wider pattern that's been showing up across the Democratic Party's more online, more activist wing all year. A pattern of confident, sweeping moral claims that fall apart the second someone actually checks them against the facts. It's the same instinct driving a mayor to call America's own 250th birthday a story about oppression instead of achievement. The same instinct driving a talk show host to compare being black in America to living under a regime that executes women for showing their hair. And the same instinct driving a sitting senator to reach for constitutional outrage that only ever seems to activate when it's politically useful. None of these are isolated missteps. They're the same underlying habit, showing up in different rooms. Treat the most dramatic, most maximalist version of a claim as automatically true, and count on the fact that most of the audience won't bother checking whether the person making it applied the same standard last time their own side was in charge. Maher's entire value on nights like this one is that he actually checks. That's a low bar. It's also, apparently, a bar most of Schiff's own colleagues in the party's activist wing can't seem to clear, and the House vote makes this even harder to spin. This wasn't some hypothetical about what Congress theoretically could do. It was an actual bill with actual bipartisan sponsors that would have forced exactly the outcome Schiff claims to want. And it failed by 7 votes, with members of his own party helping kill it. If the concern were genuinely about the Constitution and not about which party happens to be running the executive branch this year, that vote should have been unanimous among anyone who shares Schiff's stated principles. It wasn't close to it. 7 votes is the kind of margin where a handful of Democrats deciding the political optics of blocking Trump's Iran operation weren't worth the risk was enough to sink the entire thing, while Schiff was out doing television hits about how urgently Congress needed to act. But notice what that means for Schiff specifically. If you're going to build your entire brand, and Schiff has for years now, around being the Constitution's last line of defense against a lawless executive, you don't get to switch that concern on only when the executive is from the other party. Either the national interest standard is dangerously vague and Congress needs to claw back its authority regardless of who's using it, in which case Schiff owes Obama's Justice Department the exact same lecture he just gave Trump. Or the standard is fine when applied reasonably, in which case his entire framing of the current Iran operation as some unprecedented constitutional crisis falls apart because it's using the same legal reasoning his own party already normalized 15 years ago. He doesn't get to have it both ways, and Maher didn't let him pretend otherwise on his own show, in front of his own audience, live. That's really the pattern worth remembering the next time you see a Democrat rolling out grave constitutional language about a Republican president. Ask what they said the last time a Democrat did the exact same thing. More often than not, especially with someone like Schiff, whose entire national profile was built on performing outrage about executive overreach, during the Trump years specifically, you'll find the silence deafening. The Constitution didn't suddenly start mattering to Adam Schiff in 2026. It just became useful again. It's worth zooming out on Schiff specifically here because this isn't an isolated moment out of character. It's actually the defining pattern of his entire national career. This is a guy who spent years as the face of the first impeachment effort, standing in front of cameras insisting the integrity of American democracy was on the line, that no one is above the law, that congressional oversight of the executive was sacred and non-negotiable. Fine principles if you actually believe them consistently. But go back and look at how loudly Schiff defended congressional war powers, oversight authority, or executive restraint during the Obama years when his own party held the very power he now claims is being dangerously abused. You won't find much. You'll find a member of Congress who discovered a passion for checks and balances at almost exactly the moment his own party lost the White House, and who's now trying to sell that discovery as principled constitutionalism instead of what it actually is: partisan opportunism wearing a suit made out of the Federalist Papers. That's what made this particular moment on Maher's show land as hard as it did, and why it's worth actually understanding instead of just laughing at the clip. It wasn't just that Schiff got caught flat-footed not recognizing an Obama-era quote. It's that the entire architecture of his public persona, the somber tone, the Hamilton quotes, the warnings about presidents growing too fond of war, collapsed the instant someone forced him to apply his own stated standard to his own team. That's the actual weakness here, and it's not unique to Schiff. It's the same weakness running through most of the loudest resistance rhetoric coming out of that wing of the party for the better part of a decade. Constitutional principles that only ever seem to activate when they're politically convenient and that mysteriously go quiet the moment applying them consistently would mean criticizing their own side. And that's the actual takeaway worth holding on to here, beyond just enjoying watching a sitting senator get caught flat-footed on live television. The next time you hear a Democrat reach for grave, constitutional-sounding language to attack a Republican president's use of power, the honest question isn't whether the concern sounds serious. It's whether that same person applied the identical standard the last time their own party held the exact same power. 9 times out of 10, with figures like Schiff, the answer is no. And that gap between the stated principle and the actual applied standard is the whole story. It's not really about war powers or Libya or Iran specifically. It's about a political class that's gotten extremely comfortable dressing up partisan convenience as constitutional principle, banking on the fact that most of the audience won't bother checking whether they said the same thing 5 years earlier. Maher checked. That's the whole video, really. One guy doing 5 seconds of homework that an entire cable news ecosystem apparently couldn't be bothered to do first. If you like this breakdown, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.